Historians, like archaeologists, often struggle to reconstruct events of the past based on shards and shreds of evidence. Ozarks at-large's Jacqueline Froelich says the efforts to figure out just what happened on a dark day in Arkansas history more than 100 years ago continue.
Between the end of the Civil War and the start of World War I, nearly 4,000 African Americans were lynched in the American South. Such extreme acts of public violence were used to terrorize and control blacks, including in Arkansas, where an estimated 300 lynchings occurred. According to historian Richard Buckelew, he's an associate professor at Bethune-Cookman University at Daytona Beach, Florida. He documents race violence in the South, and one incident in particular has haunted him. While writing his dissertation in 1999 at the University of Arkansas on lynching in Arkansas, Buckelew discovered an eyewitness account written in 1866 by a man named William Mallett, describing a mass hanging at an African-American settlement just outside of Pine Bluff.
Well, when I read the account of William Mallett, his letters stated that due to some trouble during the night between locals and some of the local African-Americans, that he woke up the next morning and found that their cabins had been burnt down and there were 24 men, women, and children hanging from the trees.
William Mallett had chronicled the terrible account in a letter to U.S. Senator Thaddeus Stevens, a leading abolitionist who helped to draft the 13th Amendment, ending institutionalized slavery in 1865. Richard Buckelew found a copy of the letter in Stevens-bound papers online at the National Archives, but he failed to find a response from Senator Stevens to Mr. Mallett. But if the account is true, it would constitute the largest mass lynching in American history.
Well, I've looked through a number of sources over the years, but specifically, I went back to Pine Bluff this past year and went through their library system and through the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff's archives, looking for any kind of newspaper account, whether it be, the regular newspaper or one of the black newspapers that was published in the region, and was unable to find anything there. And then also searched through some of the papers of people that had lived there during that period of time. And again, I wasn't able to find anything to substantiate it.
Still, the single written account is gathering steam, having recently been published in a 2013 book, African Americans of Pine Bluff in Jefferson County, by Jimmy and Donna Cunningham. The mass lynching is also included in a Wikipedia entry on Pine Bluff. But Buckelew, who's checked out both of these sources, doesn't seem perturbed.
History is stories, and of course, there are any number of things that happen that aren't recorded on a daily basis throughout history. But and those are things that we want to hear. I mean, we want to find out about these types of things. And there are any number of reasons why something might not be recorded at the time that it happened. There could have been repercussions for those that might have tried to record something like that. It could have been considered, damaging to the local community or people who carried it out, But we are always interested in things that are certainly out of the ordinary, and when it comes to something as violent and dramatic as lynching, especially when you mention men, women, and children, it's something that we feel a little bit hesitant to let go of, because why would someone make that up? That's the first thing that comes to mind. We know how dangerous a period it was during Reconstruction for African Americans, and we know that any number of people were lynched during that period, and it's a period in which the number of lynchings was very underrepresented because they weren't recorded routinely. So we were very hesitant to let that go.
2 months before the Confederates formally surrendered to Union forces at Appomattox, Virginia, effectively ending this Civil War, freedmen's bureaus were established by an act of Congress, including one at Pine Bluff. Operating up until 1872, the bureaus provided critical food, housing, and medical aid, as well as schooling and legal assistance to emancipated African Americans. Agents also conveyed confiscated Confederate lands for homesteads to blacks. Prior to emancipation, enslaved African Americans were rarely killed, Buckelew says, considered valuable property. But after 4 million enslaved blacks had gained their freedom, their presence during Reconstruction infuriated those who thrived on institutionalized slavery. As a result, race violence and murder became routine in the South, with detailed accounts appearing in local papers, front page above the fold. And Pine Bluff historian Richard Buckelew says, being a long-established African-American district and a historic haven for runaway slaves, Pine Bluff could have been a prime target for a mass lynching.
Most of the violence that happens during Reconstruction is meant to stem the tide of change. And it's certainly, Pine Bluff was already, had a large black population, and they had, black professionals, et cetera, free blacks in the area. And so something like this it wasn't just meant to ward off these people, because why would you leave people hanging in the trees and things of that nature? I mean, but to put it into context within the period, certainly it would also serve as a message to the community that this is what could happen to you.
And if it did occur, could an event of this magnitude be covered up to protect those who committed mass murder?
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, during this period of time, the people who control the newspaper, were also part and parcel of the city. I mean, and it may have been considered to be, bad publicity for the city. Any number of reasons why someone might have wanted to cover it up. But I feel that if something like that happened, it would have had to have gotten out beyond Pine Bluff, or maybe within, the surrounding regions, or Little Rock, or somewhere. I mean, people are pretty bad at keeping secrets, and this is a pretty dramatic and violent secret, and so I find it hard to believe that there is no account.
Richard Buckelew says he will continue to search the record for more evidence.
Of course, I don't. It's not the only lynching that I'm investigating, but the job now is to start combing through the smaller newspapers and looking for sources in local archives, whether it be in Little Rock, at different universities, to try to see where we can go from there, and also to try to find maybe members of the Mallet family and see if they have any recollection or any kind of records that may have existed, or can maybe point me in a direction, and see what happens from there. What I've done so far is mainly hit the concrete, the major things, the major newspapers and the major papers that make sense. And now you start getting into the finer, things that branch off of that, and see where you can see what you can find.
Historian Richard Buckelew will include any fresh findings in his forthcoming book, Lynching in Arkansas. For Ozarks at Large, I'm Jacqueline Froelich.